In an underground elevator full of supplies, a boy wakes up without memories. As the elevator ascends, he hears one of the boxes make a weird noise and takes a closer look only to be startled by a pig. When the elevator reaches the surface, a door opens and dozens of boys appear to look at him. Gally jumps in and calls the boy a greenie before taking him out. The guy panics and starts running to escape, but he discovers he's in a small glade surrounded by huge walls, so there's no exit. Afterward, the boy is thrown into a cage and the leader Albie comes to ask him some questions, so the boy nervously explains he doesn't remember anything. Albie says that's normal and that none of the guys here have any memories except for their names, which usually are remembered after a day or two. After the newbie promises not to run again, Albie lets him out to give him a tour of the place. The group lives in this small glade and they do all the chores required to survive, like hunting and building shelters. Anything else is brought by the elevator, which they call the box. Once a month, the box sends up fresh supplies and a new amnesiac boy, who is nicknamed Greenie. Nobody knows who sends them the things or why they're there. The newbie notices a creepy door in the wall and Albie mentions the 3 rules. Do your part, never harm another person, and never enter that door. Afterward, Chuck finishes giving the Greenie the tour, but the new guy is obsessed with looking at the door. At that moment, Ben and Minnow come out and the newbie is surprised, saying he thought they weren't allowed to enter. Chuck explains that only a handful of boys can do so because they're the designated runners, casually mentioning that there's a maze behind the wall. The Greenie approaches the door to take a closer look, but he's pushed down by Gally, who reminds him of the rules. As the new guy freaks out and demands an explanation, the other boys surround him to try to calm him down. The conversation is interrupted when the maze starts moving and the door suddenly closes. That night, the boys throw a party to celebrate the new arrival. Newt tells the Greenie that the runners go every morning into the maze to map it. They've been looking for an exit for 3 years but haven't found anything yet. At that moment, a strange noise can be heard from the maze and Newt explains it changes every night. If the runners don't come out before the doors close, they have to spend the night in the maze and nobody has survived such a thing because monsters known as grievers kill them. The Greenie wants to be a runner, but Newt says runners are chosen. Then the newbie is accidentally pushed by Gally and another kid who are currently wrestling. Gally asks him if he wants to wrestle too and all the boys form a circle around them. The rule is simple: whoever pushes his opponent out of the circle first wins. The fight begins and Gally immediately shows off his skills, easily throwing the newbie around while mocking him with nicknames. After some struggle, the newbie manages to grab Gally and throw him on the ground, which impresses everyone. Gally immediately retaliates by kicking him to make him fall and the newbie hits his head pretty hard, causing him to remember that his name is Thomas. That night, Thomas dreams about running, a strange lab, and a woman's voice saying wicked is good. The next morning, Albie takes Thomas to a place on the wall where all the boys have carved their names. While Thomas adds his, he notices some names were crossed out because they died. When Thomas goes to the woods to pick up fertilizer, he finds a grave and a bunch of bones in the ground. He's then startled by Ben, who looks very sick and keeps growling. Suddenly, Ben tackles Thomas, saying things like, "I saw you and you did this. It's your fault." He tries choking Thomas, who grabs a skull and hits him with it to escape. A chase ensues and Thomas manages to yell for help before Ben makes him roll down the hill. Soon they make it back to the settlement, and when Ben is about to kill Thomas, Newt hits him to knock him down. The boys work together to hold Ben and check his stomach, revealing a disturbing scar. Ben asks for mercy, but the boys put him in the pit anyway. Then Albie explains to Thomas that Ben is going through something called the changing, which happens when a boy gets stung in the maze. It's the first time it happened in daylight, though. Since the infection is spreading and they know it'll only get worse, the boys push a crying Ben into the maze right before the door closes. That night, they cross Ben's name out on the wall. Thomas has another dream about the strange woman, the lab, a girl helping him through an experiment. In the morning, Thomas notices that Albie enters the maze although he isn't a runner, so Newt explains he went to retrace Ben's steps to find out how he was stung. He also reveals Albie was the first boy to arrive at the glade and had to spend a month alone before the box brought more people. Later that day, the boys worry because Albie and the runners aren't back and time is running out. When the door is about to close, they notice Minnow carrying a wounded Albie, which is slowing him down. Sending rescuers is against the rules, but Thomas decides to run into the maze anyway, making it inside right before the door finishes closing. Then Thomas checks on Albie and discovers he's been stung, so Minnow had to knock him out. The grievers can already be heard screeching and Thomas wants to protect Albie, but Minnow insists there's nowhere to hide. Noticing the ivy on the wall, Thomas gets an idea. With Minnow's help, they tie Albie up and begin lifting his body to hang him among the plants. However, when they're still working, a griever appears and Minnow runs away. Thomas makes sure to hold on to the rope to keep Albie up before hiding behind the plants. When the griever walks by, it doesn't notice Thomas, who discovers this creature is made of mechanical parts. After the monster is gone, Thomas comes out to tie the rope to the branches, but he quickly has to hide when the griever reappears. He waits until the creature goes away again to start looking around. Suddenly, some goo falls on his shoulder and Thomas looks up to find the griever climbing on the walls. It lands on the ground and starts chasing after Thomas, who begins running as fast as he can until he's stuck in a blocked quarter. A desperate Thomas begins climbing the ivy and makes it to the top of a wall to run through an upper corridor, only to get stuck between a very high edge and the Griever. With no other choice, he makes a big jump and manages to hold on to the ivy. The Griever does the same and lands on top of him, bringing out a mechanical arm with a needle that tries to sting him. Thomas dodges it, but the weight of the Griever causes the ivy to break, dropping them both on the ground. The Griever's limbs are now tangled in the plants, so Thomas takes the chance to run and bumps into Minnow. The maze is starting to change and Minnow runs into another section, hoping to lose the Griever that's freed itself from the plants. Seeing the walls move, Thomas waits for the creature to catch up. When it's close enough, he begins running between the closing walls, taunting the monster into following him. The next day, the boys are shocked to see Minnow and Thomas bring Albie out of the maze and learn that Thomas' plan managed to kill a Griever. Afterward, the group has a meeting to discuss what happened and Gally wants to punish Thomas for breaking the rules, but Minnow thinks they should make him a runner. Everyone agrees except Gally, who thinks Thomas is still too new. The conversation is interrupted when they hear the box coming up, which shouldn't be happening so early. When they look inside, they find no supplies, and to their shock, the newbie is an unconscious girl that Thomas recognizes from his dream. Newt finds a note in her hand that says she's the last one ever. Suddenly, she wakes up and calls Thomas by name before falling asleep again. After the girl is taken to a hut, Thomas points out that now they know they can survive the maze and he wants to return to look for answers. So Minnow convinces 3 runners to join them. The group rushes inside and finds the dead Griever smashed between walls. When Minnow touches it, the creature moves for a second, but it's just a reflex. Then the team works together to rip the Griever's leg off and find a strange beeping device that they take back to the glade. Later in a hut, they take a closer look at the device and notice the letters WCKD, which are also on their supplies. They conclude that whoever sent the boys here has also made the Grievers. Thomas wants to keep searching the maze for more clues and Gally thinks he should be punished for breaking so many rules. Newt decides that Thomas can spend one night in the pit and become an official runner tomorrow. Afterward, Minnow takes Thomas to the hut where he keeps all his maps and a mock-up of the maze. He explains he's mapped every variation of the maze already and there's nothing left to see, yet he hasn't found an exit. Now that they have the device, he thinks they may have a better chance. On the outer sections of the maze, they've found the numbers 1 through 8. Every night when the maze changes, it opens up a new section, and they always follow the same order. The device from the Griever has a 7, so they conclude the monsters come from that section. At that moment, the girl wakes up and hides on top of the watchtower. She keeps throwing things to keep the boys away, but she stops when she sees Thomas. He climbs to the top too and finds the girl holding a knife. She doesn't remember anything but knows her name is Teresa. The others told her that she kept whispering Thomas' name in her sleep, but she doesn't know who he is either. Thomas explains the situation, and in return Teresa tells him about the only memory she has, which matches his dreams. Teresa also reveals she found 2 vials in her pocket. They have a blue liquid and the same 4 letters, which makes Thomas realize they're short for wicked. Since his dream said that wicked is good, Thomas thinks they should inject Albie with his blue liquid. When he tries to do so, Albie freaks out and repeats he shouldn't be here. The boys hold him down and Teresa gives him the injection, which instantly puts him to sleep. Afterward, Gally locks Thomas in the pit for the night. Moments later, Chuck secretly brings him some food and shows him a little doll he carved. Chuck can't remember his parents, but he still wishes he could reunite with them and give them the doll. Thomas promises that he'll get everyone out of the glade so Chuck can fulfill his wish. In the morning, Minnow and Thomas enter the maze as soon as the door opens. Following Minnow's guidance, they run through the different corridors and cross a few sections until they make it to the 7th, which wasn't supposed to be open for another week. They found Ben's clothes on the ground, meaning a Griever must have dragged him here. At that moment, the device starts making a weird noise and Thomas concludes it's showing them the way. The noise gets stronger when they turn in the right direction, and after walking for a while they find an area Minnow never saw before. There's a long bridge above an abyss and a wall at the end, but when they reach that wall the device activates a hidden door. There's a tunnel on the other side covered with Griever goo. Suddenly a light scans the boys and an alarm wails before the tunnel begins closing down. Minnow and Thomas immediately start running, having to dodge the moving walls in Section 7. For a moment they run on opposite sides, so Thomas has to make a quick move to reunite with his friend. When they're about to leave Section 7, the ground suddenly opens up and part of a wall falls. The boys keep on running as fast as they can as the maze continues to change around them, having to dodge all kinds of moving parts. Eventually they have no choice but to crawl between 2 closing walls, getting out right before they get crushed. Moments later the duo is back on the glade and tells the others they found the exit. However, Gally is worried because it could be a trap and an argument ensues, only to be interrupted by Teresa announcing that Albie is awake. When they check on him, Albie announces they can't leave and that he remembers now. He says Thomas was always their favorite and asks why he had to come here. This conversation is also interrupted because the boys have noticed that the maze door hasn't closed. In fact, new doors are opening. Thomas wants to make a plan, but there's no time because the Grievers are coming out of the maze. Everyone immediately starts running to hide in the woods, but they can already hear the screams of some boys getting attacked by the monsters. A few guys, including Gally, hide in the box and close it. When a boy outside asks for help, a griever hears him and captures him too. Thomas, Teresa, and some others hide in the vegetable field, only for a mechanical tail to appear among the plants and capture one of the boys. The group has to keep running to reunite with Albie and more boys while they watch how more and more people are being caught and stunned. When a griever tries to block their way, Teresa throws a lamp to set it on fire. Then they keep moving as fast as they can, losing a few more boys along the way. When Albie falls, they stop to help him and Thomas stands in front of the group with a blade to confront the incoming griever. At that moment, the hunters surround the beast and shower it with spears, giving the rest of the group the chance to rush into the biggest hut and lock the door. The griever pounds on the door to no avail, so then it walks on the roof and destroys it to kidnap another boy. Then the tail begins reaching through the walls to catch Chuck, so the others immediately grab their friend to try to save him. When the monster gets the injection ready, Albie runs to break it and hits the mechanical limb until it drops Chuck to leave. Unfortunately, the griever returns a second later and captures Albie, who tells Thomas to get everyone out of the glade before he's taken away. Then the noise stops and the group leaves the hut to discover the only survivors are them and the boys who hid in the box. Gally comes over to punch Thomas, blaming him for everything. Desperate for answers, Thomas injects himself with the griever's sting and passes out. He dreams about the lab again, seeing Teresa, some boys and experiments, and a strange woman who insists Wicked is good. When Thomas wakes up, he's in a pit with Teresa, who saved him with her other vial. Newt, Minnow, and Chuck come to check on them and explain Gally has taken control of the group by convincing them that everything is Thomas' fault. To their shock, Thomas agrees and tells them what he's remembered. When the boys were kids, Wicked experimented on them before sending them to the maze one by one. Thomas and Teresa work for Wicked and watch the whole process. The glade and the maze aren't a prison, they're a test they must pass. The team agrees they must finish what they started. Minutes later, Thomas and Teresa are taken to Gally, who is finishing crossing out names on the wall. Gally wants to throw the duo into the maze, but some of the boys are hesitant and think Thomas may truly know the exit. Thomas uses the distraction to bring down the guards holding him and Minnow keeps Gally still by threatening him with his blade. Then Thomas announces he and his little team are leaving, and everyone is welcome to join them. Gally thinks he's crazy but half of the boys enter the maze with him. After lots of running, the new group makes it to Section 7 and finds a griever guarding the tunnel. The teams rush down the bridge and attack the beast, surrounding it with their spears and blades. They start pushing while dodging the attacks from the tail, which still manages to throw a boy off the bridge. During the struggle, Teresa attacks a mechanical leg and it accidentally hits the device, causing it to fly off. Chuck immediately runs to retrieve it and ends up on the edge of the bridge, where he sees a second grieve climbing up. Thankfully, Teresa pulls Chuck back before he falls. With lots of effort, the boys keep on pushing and eventually manage to throw the griever into the abyss, only for two more grievers to appear on the bridge. While the boys hold them back and lose more people, Teresa and Chuck take the device to the door to open it and reveal the tunnel. The duo runs inside and finds another door that won't open without an 8 code number. Thomas concludes it must be the sequence of the maze sections, which Minnow starts reciting. Before he can finish, a griever jumps from above and lands on top of him. One of the guys rushes in as a distraction, so the griever catches him instead and Minnow is saved. As the group begins moving back to hide in the tunnel while still keeping the grievers at bay, Minnow finishes telling the number sequence and Teresa uses it to open the door. The walls in the tunnel start closing again and Thomas throws a spear at the grievers to keep them back until they're crushed. Afterward, the group crosses the door and finds a corridor in a modern building with actual electricity. They walk through it until they find another door that says exit. Behind it, there's a lab filled with dead scientists and guards. In the main room, there are computers with security cameras that confirm the scientists have been watching the glade all along. When Thomas presses a button, a recording begins playing on the screen showing the woman from his dreams. Dr. Ava is the director of Wicked, which stands for Operations of the World Catastrophe Kill Zone Department. She explains that if they're watching this, it means they've successfully completed the maze trials, which exist for a reason. Many years ago, the sun scorched Earth and billions of lives were lost to fire and famine. Afterward, a virus known as the flare took over the world. It attacks the brain and makes people violent. They used to believe it was uncurable, but eventually an immune generation was born and the scientists started experimenting on those kids to find the cure. The kids were put inside harsh environments like the glade to study their brain activity, but not everyone agreed with these methods, so Wicked kept it a secret. The video ends with Ada self-deleting with a gun. As the group tries to process this information, another door opens. Before they can move, Gally appears behind them and Teresa notices he's been stunned. Gally says there's no freedom out there and opens fire at the same time that Minnow throws a spear at him to kill him. Unfortunately, the stray bullet hits Chuck, who gives Thomas his little doll and thanks him before dying. While the group cries for their lost friend, a bunch of armed men appear to drag them out of the lab. A helicopter is waiting for them outside to take them away. Meanwhile, Ava is still alive and telling her colleagues that Thomas has taken the bait, so Phase 2 begins. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.